Welcome to the Founders Chat, where I talk with founders about the hidden moments behind building their companies. Today we have Craig Fenton from Fenton Innovation. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you very much, Alan. Nice to be here.
So let's start with the easy question. So tell me, what is Fenton Innovation?
Fenton Innovation, or FI as we call it, is an AI company. We build AI automations for enterprises, and we have three industry vertical offerings, modular AI suites, if you like. One in the marine sector, everything from super yachts up to super tankers. One in private capital, mostly private equity clients and also their portfolio companies. And the third in travel and tourism.
Okay, that's great. What kind of, you mentioned you have private equity, so you implement AI, like kind of analyze potential investments?
Yeah, for example, so any private equity or venture capital company will typically have an investment pipeline which starts with deal origination, so finding companies that are interesting to investigate further, then doing a little bit of research to understand a little bit more about that company and perhaps the industry or competitive environment that they're in. Then if it's still interesting, there's probably some detailed analysis and some due diligence. So due diligence checklists, even doing the due diligence itself can be automated in certain areas, preparing the investment memorandum for the investment committee. And outside that, writing investor updates for limited partners or other investors in the portfolio, and so on. So anything along that investment pipeline can be automated so that the professionals in private equity or venture capital can focus on the important judgments and decisions and also the sort of interpersonal relationships that they need to build both with investors and companies that they invest in. So that's the core thing. We call that eating your own dog food. So, you do AI to yourself first. And then once that's done, the private equity companies can then push us into their portfolio companies to sort of do AI, if you like, to them. And that helps accelerate the value creation plan. And after they do that in a few cycles, it sort of becomes a pretty known lever and perhaps even part of the investment thesis. They start looking for companies with value release characteristics that would be accelerated by AI.
Okay, that's amazing. So if you have different kind of companies, how does the process work? You send an engineer to the company to analyze what can be improved with AI, right?
Yeah, typically it starts with a discussion, an exploratory discussion, and it might sound a bit counterintuitive coming from a guy who owns an AI company, but we never start with the technology. We always start with the business and understanding the vision for growth, how the customer experience or customer journey works, any choke points that are perhaps limiting the scalability of the company, and then we'll take a look through that lens at where AI might be able to help. So we sort of start with the business and go from there.
Yeah, it makes total sense. With AI, sometimes company doesn't need AI for a specific thing; it needs something else. So if you can help with that, that's great. All right. So, and before starting this venture, what are you doing?
I've been in technology for 25 years, more or less. So I had a long period in a company called Accenture. I was the sales lead for Accenture's communications, media, and technology business across Europe and Latin America. 124 countries, I think it was, about $3 billion business. Did that for a while and, had a lot of fun there. Like you, I was at Google for a while. The role I had there, I was a combination of what most companies would call the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Strategy Officer for Google's business in the UK and Ireland, and also for a couple of years did the same role in France, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, cluster of countries that Google kind of called Western Europe at the time. So that was a really wild ride at a pretty important sort of growth phase for Google. In fact, my team was responsible at one stage for launching Bard, which is the original consumer product, the predecessor of Gemini, the generative AI product. So really there during the formative moments, at least of the generative AI part of the AI process. Had a bit of time in professional sports. I ran the media and entertainment business of the New Zealand All Blacks and Black Ferns,
Oh, wow.
following an investment by Silver Lake, which is a big private equity company, and now Fi.
Okay, that's amazing. That's impressive. Yeah, I found you through the Googler ex Googlers network,
Okay.
and I remember when I joined Google, Gemini wasn't a thing; it was Bard. And one day they just renamed it. I think internally it's still called Bard. What made you make the decision of you had great job, great responsibility, great position. I'm sure the compensation wasn't bad and it was pretty stable. So why did you make the decision to start your own thing?
Actually, after I left the professional sports job, I had the great privilege and luxury of taking some downtime. Not much, as it turned out. I intended to take more than I actually did, but used that time to follow my curiosity and just go back to the books and learn more about AI. I was pretty familiar. Obviously, I've worked in technology companies and had a lot to do with it over then, but I wanted to understand myself, get my hands on the tools, if you like, and learn how to build agents and automate processes and so on. I ended up completing about 14 nano qualifications with various different universities and institutes. And the more I got into it, the more I reach the view that this is really a moment that we're in at the moment. And it's a very significant moment. And my view is that every business or organization in the world will progressively re-engineer themselves for AI. So it's a pretty big addressable market, if you like, and believed in that so deeply, I started a company and decided to sort of bet everything on it, so to speak. So great luxury being an entrepreneur. You're an entrepreneur yourself. Being a founder is a wild ride, but I'm super passionate about the product. I can see the value that it's creating for the customers that we work with, and really enthusiastic about growing it.
Yeah, I have a similar story. I mean, it's always hard to start, and we have a more consumer product. We're targeting solopreneurs, which is the minimal unit of an enterprise. I think it has a bit of the challenges of B2B and B2C at the same time, but I was shocked with how fast the technology moved. I was at Google 2 years and a half, and before Google, I was the CTO of startup. So in these 2 years and a half, there was a technological revolution in between. And even if Google is one of the pioneers in AI, being inside, you don't necessarily see all the potential because when you're a founder, you need to be on top of everything. You need to know all the new things that are launching every day because otherwise you are behind other founders. So it's insane at the speed that all this is moving.
Yeah, well, fun fact on that, the famous law, Moore's law, has dominated the industry for sort of 30 or 40 years. That was to do with the power of a processor, transistor, effectively. That the processing power of computing would halve, and sorry, the power would double, and the cost would halve. And that's held largely true every year, so sort of doubling every year. The equivalent in AI, measured by some metrics on the sort of effectiveness of these large language models, is doubling approximately every 90 days. So dramatically more rapid, as you say, than even the predecessor law. So there's a sort of new Moore's law that's emerged for AI, and for me, it's probably the fourth most important tectonic shift, or one of four important tectonic shifts, I would say, in technology. The first was the internet. I suspect a little bit older than you, but I'm certainly old enough to remember the dawn of that. Sort of 98 to 2002 period. The second, I think, was the smartphone. Steve Jobs, 2007, which created the ecosystem, the mobile-based ecosystems that we know today, iOS and Android. The third, for my money, is blockchain, and now this, generative AI, which I think is a very significant moment and probably bigger in magnitude than the predecessors.
Yeah, it looks like it is. It's definitely going to change a lot of jobs. We're in the industry of the future of work, And we're already seeing a trend. A lot of people are leaving corporates to become solopreneurs, to start a business on their own. In the past, it was much more difficult because you need to worry about outreach, about automations through different tools, or do manual things like accountancy, all the invoices. Today, you can automate 90%, if not
That's right.
100%, right? So I think there is one good thing here. I think the human part of the jobs, it's having the spotlight. Like people are valuing humans more than before. This is what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that actually. And the AI applications that we're deploying in companies are augmentative for the most part. So we believe at FI that the AI age is more than ever a human age. There will for sure be some substitutional, frictional unemployment, mostly jobs that really shouldn't be done by people, monotonous, largely clerical, pattern matching and big data sets, things like this. But we believe that the power of the technology is mostly to sort of superpower the things that we do. What do we do well? Well, we use our experience to make decisions, make judgments, build interpersonal relationships, build trust-based relationships with customers. But most jobs, I think most people, who are listening to this would recognize this of their own job. Over time, you get this sort of expansion of time that is taken preparing to do that rather than doing it. Right? I call it crap creep, the sort of mundane clerical manual analysis work. So the power, I think, of the technology is to take that sort of 20% of the time that you use today actually making judgments, decisions, building relationships, communicating, and expand that to 80%, and letting the machines do the rest. They're doing your preparation for you. So to use the AI tools available, I think you do need to be an expert, a subject matter expert in the domain. You can't really sort of outsource the critical thinking, or shouldn't.
And I totally agree. Now I'm not doing this 100% manually, but in the past, every time I was downloading invoices from different providers, inputting the data in a spreadsheet, I was thinking, nobody should do that. It's so boring and useless, but it has to be done. So I agree.
Well, here's a story for you just on invoices. So we've just finished deploying an automation for a tourism company in New Zealand, and they organise beautiful sort of 2 to 3 week vacations. You're seeing both islands, 15 stops, quite complex itineraries, and they get about 5,000 invoices a month. And the finance team, right? These are qualified chartered accountants and finance graduates. We're spending a lot of their time just reconciling those invoices and figuring out which itineraries or travellers that they related to. That was the full-time job of 4 people. And if you're a chartered accountant or a finance graduate, this is not a life-affirming use of your skills, right? And it's very open to human error because it's just dead boring. So we built an automation for them that does 1,000 invoices a minute in this reconciliation.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I'm sure they are happier now with whatever they are doing.
I hope so.
All right. So tell me, is there something about your early story that most people don't know?
Well, I started my life as a lawyer. I used to wear a horse's hair wig and a black gown and show up to court and argue about commercial disputes. So that was wild, and I did that for 6 years. Right, that wasn't a sort of a short period, and I'm very grateful for it. It's definitely laid the foundations. It's a skill set that I use literally every day, but worked out pretty early on in my career that I didn't want to be a career lawyer. So great foundation stones, but it was steeped in tradition, and which comes with the sort of cosplay, if you like, that you still see in some of the sort of traditional British-based systems.
What made you? That was a life pivot, right? We speak about pivots in business, but that's a life one. What made you make the change?
Well, this was, I'm going to age myself here, this was sort of early 90s to late 90s. So think about what was happening at that time. The internet, became a thing really sort of the mid to late 90s, became pretty big by 98, but it wasn't Google at that stage. It was companies like AOL and Alta Vista and Ask Jeeves and Lycos and all of these names that, no longer exist. Yahoo, well, they still exist. So that was an emerging thing. And, legally, that created new questions like how does publishing work, or how does copyright work in an online setting? And that was a real thing that newspapers and magazines and so forth were grappling with. So I had some exposure to that. The other thing that was happening is that the millennium was approaching, the year 2000, and some of your listeners may remember the millennium bug. The most systems in the world, certainly the Microsoft systems, were arranged with a date protocol that effectively fell off a cliff at the end of 1999, and it wasn't really clear what would happen there. And there was just billions and billions and billions spent in the world sort of preparing for this Armageddon moment, or potential Armageddon moment as an industry. So my point is, at that time, there were some pretty big things happening in the technology space, which really just intoxicated me. I found it super interesting. Law for me was intellectually stimulating, not particularly creatively stimulating, and I wanted to throw myself headfirst into the world of technology and the world of business, which is really, in my case, the application of technology for value.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I can see a pattern when you saw that the internet revolution was coming, that you jumped into it, and now you're doing the same with AI. I think it's good timing.
I suppose that's
definitely. Okay, so your company, EFI, Fenton Innovation, now you are doing enterprise level service for different companies, helping them jump into the AI technology, automating processes, improve the way they work. But was that the idea from day one, or there were changes in direction to get here where you are today?
Well, I think we're about day 200 at the moment. So, yeah, I think it's fair to say it was the idea from day one. We've certainly found, I think the thesis and business plan has grown nuance through experience over that time. For example, we're allowing the market essentially to lead us. We're not sort of going big bang. Okay, here's the product, and we're going to bet the farm on a single thing. Rather, we're letting the market lead us. The market is telling us, these things are important. These industries are receptive, and we're designing our business and our solutions around that. So we're sort of reversing the usual pattern of a startup. And, so far, I think it's tracking unusually, perhaps, according to the plan that we had set out. Life as a founder is a mixture daily of horror and euphoria, right? It's scary as well as really exciting. But the great privilege is it's yours, and it's up to you to make it work. So got nowhere else to turn. The spotlight from a business perspective is there. But it's bearing out. And I'm usually quite hopeless at this, but Fenton Innovation is fentoninnovation.com. If you are interested in finding out, hit us up on the website.
Definitely. Thanks. So now that you mentioned the day of a founder, how does a regular day looks for you?
Well, we are a global business, so we have customers in both the Southern Hemisphere, principally Australia and New Zealand, as well as the Northern Hemisphere, UK, France, as well as the US, Florida mostly. And that is a spread that spans about 11 hours of time zone shift. So my days are pretty weird. They start pretty early. Yeah, I was on the phone this morning with my co-founder who's based in Tokyo, and they end late, because if I want to speak to New Zealand, I need to look at either the evening time when it will be tomorrow in New Zealand, or very early morning. So it's kind of like two bookends. That they're long days. Ironically, that makes the middle of the day quite relaxing. I'm in London at the moment at the time of recording, but have been in Queenstown in New Zealand, and got into a routine with my wife of going for a lunchtime ski instead of just breaking for a sandwich. We went up the hill, had a couple of hours skiing, and came back in the middle of the day. So that's
And how do you balance, for example, I don't know if you have a sports routine, go to a gym or run, how do you fit that with these different meetings at different times every day?
Not as well as I should is the honest answer. I do calisthenics, so sort of just using your own body weight for exercise every morning, just a few short minutes, but I do it every day, so that's helpful. I try to play squash from time to time. I'm also a keen golfer, so that's a little bit more time consuming. So typically that's evenings or early mornings. So I do believe that having hobbies and diversions that are completely outside your work is pretty important. But I certainly wouldn't hold myself up as the benchmark there. I think there's a lot more I can do and should do, really, from a cardio perspective at least.
Yeah, but it happens when I started Nexoc. Usually I do sports every day, and there was a period of time where I didn't. I stopped. But then, for me at least, when I stop for long enough time, then I have less energy and I sleep more. So it's kind of the time I should be exercising, I'm sleeping. It's not efficient. So it's hard to get back to the routine. Now I'm back to the routine, but yeah,
Well,
your
good
point.
on you. Yeah, I mean, it's an all-consuming thing being a founder, isn't it? I imagine it's
Yeah.
life is busy at Nexthook.
So, did you have any tough moments and how did you handle them?
Loads of tough moments. We're finding our way. That's true of any startup and probably most mature businesses as well, which continue to evolve and be affected by the change that they're navigating. So definitely finding our way. I'm very fortunate to have a fantastic co-founder, a guy called Jake Lazarus, who's an incredibly strong engineer and understand. But I think I probably had a narrow miss at the outset where I took on an engineer who probably wasn't a good guy, but probably wasn't quite skillful enough for the thing that we ended up doing. We've just completed the job, and my co-founder's been heavily involved in that, and it's worked out well. But I have a moment of dread thinking about what could have been the case had I made the wrong decision there. And I think the lesson there is hiring is the most important thing that you do. You need to really surround yourself with people who are better than you in a number of facets. Don't settle for anything less than the best, and they'll figure it out. Get out of their way, and they'll figure it out. But yeah, no, we have from time to time we have tough conversations with customers. We have ideas that we put forward that we're sort of disappointed aren't accepted. So you have to be pretty tough-skinned and get used to many more no's than you get yeses. I think was it Winston Churchill who said the test of character is to move from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. That's what it's like.
I think that's a common thing of being a founder. Either you're fundraising and you get one yes out of 10 applications, and getting customers for enterprise companies, I think it's similar. Being B2C is different, but being B2C has its own challenges. Well, you probably know it's harder to monetize. It takes sometimes years, and instead of selling the company to enterprises, you're selling to investors.
Yeah, exactly
So
that. And you have to get used to some people just don't respond at all.
yeah, so your co-founder is the technical founder, and you are handling sales and the rest, I guess.
Yeah, broadly that's true. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and about you mentioned that you had technical challenges with an engineer at the beginning. Was it easy to find a good direction, or do you still keep the customer?
Yeah, I think we recognized that early enough, like really early, like we hadn't really even started. And I saw a few orange flags and I acted immediately on it. And, that was that was the important thing. So the old adage of hire slowly and if the person's not right, act on it really quickly is right. And that was helpful in that case. The other thing is, cash is king. We're bootstrapping, so we considered raising, but decided not to. So the revenue and profitability of that revenue that from our customers, and the work that we're doing is funding the business. When you don't have a sort of big investment amount that's sort of sitting in the bank account, you have to be even more focused on cash flow. And there are some things that you just would like to do but can't. We're pretty fortunate, right? We've got a pretty good float. The business is post revenue. It's very profitable. The cash flow is good, but you still need to be very, very vigilant in managing that.
Okay, that sounds amazing. Okay, let's speak about the current ecosystem. Is there a trend you think people are underestimating?
In the founder ecosystem, is that the question?
In general, like it's probably you're going to tell me AI, but maybe I don't think AI is being underestimated, but is there something else? Or
We have a tendency as economies, as professionals, to overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. And I think that is true, certainly of AI, and of most technologies. So there's a lot of hype. A new tool at the time of recording. ChatGPT 5 has come onto the market. It's pretty impressive. It's sort of a nudge higher than the others, I think. So there's a lot of swirl around that at the moment. But next month it'll be Grok or Gemini or one of the others. So there's a lot of hype, particularly with the proliferation of tools, particularly low code and no code tools, which has really democratized the process of application development and made it available to anyone with a command of English. So there's a little bit of swirl. I think there's a little bit of hype from time to time there. I think the medium to long term impact of AI is dramatically underestimated. I think it will change everything. It will change the anatomy of businesses. It will change how business operates. We're still living in largely a 2D, web 2.0, 3.0 world where we're navigating with apps and websites. And I think the opportunity that AI introduces is to reimagine what that looks like. Like, why should the human navigate the website? Why can't the website navigate the human? Well, that's now possible, right? It hasn't been up until now. So I think there's an opportunity there to completely reinvent and reimagine how businesses operate, how customer experience works, how teams operate. I think teams in the future will be a combination of synthetic agentic swarms, AI-based agents, and humans. And managers of tomorrow will be managing both. So that'll be a new paradigm as well. And the tendency we have, I think, historically, when a new technology comes along, we tend to look at it through the lens of its predecessor. So we saw this like in the very earliest days when television came along. The first broadcasts of television were literally a camera filming a radio presenter reading their notes, right? It was radio with pictures, effectively. So it's an example of that. Okay, the new medium's here, that's television. We'll just take what worked in the old one, which was radio, and port it over. In more modern times, same trend, I think, with YouTube. Well, we know television works, 30-second commercials, work. We'll just put those 30-second commercials onto YouTube. Well, it doesn't work like that. Turns out bumper ads and 60-second or fewer segments are more effective in that medium. So the temptation I think all of us will have is to sort of look at AI and try to apply it in some way to the familiar territory that we're in at the moment, websites, apps, the way traditional businesses work. The opportunity is to upend that and completely reinvent it and reimagine it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was having a similar conversation with my co-founder last week. It's like I think we're at this point where the technology is available, accessible, but we haven't invented yet what is going to be the next thing. It's like we're in 1997, and the browsers were not really a thing, and the search engines were not really a thing, and they were going to appear a couple of years later. So I agree. I think it's hard to imagine now And I think it's a great opportunity for entrepreneurs now to enter this space. I fully agree.
Absolutely.
All right, so how do you define success? Not from a business point of view, but for yourself.
I think it starts with healthy relationships. The people around you. I'm married. My wife Meredith. I think married for 25 years. She's a beautiful, fantastic woman. Very lucky to have that partnership. Two beautiful boys, immediate family, and sort of you expand out through the group. The experiences that you're able to live. Life is for living, so to speak. So I think we remember the relationships. We remember how people make us feel. We remember the experiences of the beautiful world we live in. So my definition of success probably starts there. And then as a third tier, I'd say, all of us need a purpose. We need to be fulfilled and content that we are doing something that's worthwhile and meaningful. So if you're lucky enough to carve out work, life's work that is exciting, interesting, fun, a little bit uncomfortable, then you've got the trifecta. So relationships, experiences, and a fulfilling way of using your time from a work perspective that gives you purpose and meaning.
Fulfilling a purpose that motivates you and keeps you going, and family and relationships first make total sense.
Yeah.
Great. So now imagine your 22-year-old self walk into your office. What would you tell him?
Take more risks.
All right. So you are one of these persons that you try to minimize regret rather than risk, right?
Yeah, I think, well, we all go through these life stages, right? There's never a good time, which also means there's never a bad time. And why wait? And the thing that holds most entrepreneurs back is starting. Lots of people have ideas. The hard thing is to start and do something about it.
Yeah, and sometimes I think we underestimate the challenges of starting a business. And I see a lot of people starting and loving it, but I see other people that they quit their stable job, they start, and then they regret. So I think there is a balance. It's not for everybody, right?
Not for everybody. And look, I completely agree with that, Alan. For some people, speaking last week to some professionals who work for Guide Dog Australia, it's a not for profit business that prepares dogs to help people with blindness or partial sight. I imagine that's incredibly fulfilling, and many people have carved out beautiful, fantastically exhilarating careers in large companies or small ones. So whatever your path, I think the most important thing is to understand your why. Right? Your why is what really floats your boat. What are you passionate about? What are you excited about? What makes your eyes light up? Are you leaning forward? You're talking faster about it. Now, these are all signals that it's something that's genuinely and deeply interesting to you. And those are the sort of outward manifestations, I think, of a fulfilling job with purpose. And for everyone, that's different.
Yeah. I agree. Amazing. So if you can pick, what is the number one thing you wish you knew before you started FI? What could it be?
Really good question. I think having a better view, market fit and the sort of needs of the market, is the nirvana, I would say, for a startup. Not sure you can accelerate that. You kind of just have to step forward and live it. But information is everything, and the value of your business is only as big as the impact it's able to make for its customers, whether they're B2B or B2C. So finding that fit is really important, and I think every entrepreneur would wish they knew more about that market fit at the beginning of their business than they do en route.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, if I had to pick one, it would be the same because I think we are getting to it now. But after changes in direction, at the beginning, we did validate demand, but it wasn't enough. We needed to validate that it was painful enough for people to pay for the service. We did let's say the high level demand validation with the waitlist. That wasn't enough, and now we are arriving to a stronger point where we know that what we are doing works, but we learn the hard way, right? So I completely get your point here.
Well, I think a lot of the skill, I'm sure sounds like this is the case with Nexthook, a lot of the skill of entrepreneurship is being able to pivot when you realize how wrong you are.
Yeah, and fast. Yeah, yeah, definitely. So basically, long story short, people want to make money, right? They want to offer services, they want to get paid for what they know. There is no doubt there. The problem is when you build the platform, the tools, and everything, they don't know how to sell themselves. They don't know how to build a brand. They don't know how to market their services. And here is where we are going now. And with AI, we are automating all this and helping them. So
Yeah.
it's
Well, I
getting
suppose
even
they're your
better.
marketing engine, aren't they? Your volume is only as big as the business that your clients are able to win.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they win, we win. We're in that space. Well, I guess it's a little bit true for every business, right? But in our case, it's proportional to their success. All right. So if you can send a message for your customers today, which message could you send?
You know, the most common thing that we hear when we speak to customers is, boy, I know AI is a thing, but where do I start? My message to customers is start somewhere and today. And here's the reality, right? This emergent technology is changing so quickly, not even the experts are experts. Mastery is ephemeral, it's not durable, it's perishable. And anyone that shows up and presents as an AI expert, and I certainly wouldn't present myself in that way, either doesn't understand it well enough or, is lying, because this is a field that's changing rapidly. Working in this space is more like being an explorer, and you have to be a pretty athletic explorer and be prepared to change rapidly and often. But it's quite an unusual thing, I think, in business to work in a space that's so fast and rapidly emerging that you can never truly master it. At least in the past, things stayed stable enough for ground truths to emerge and for the foundation stones to be sufficiently stable to build durable business models on. Now I think we're in this world where those business models will continue to sort of go through metamorphosis. They'll continue to shapeshift according to the industry. I find that incredibly exciting, quite uncomfortable, but exciting. So the message to the customer is start, start now and start somewhere. And don't be afraid to feel incompetent, because I guarantee you're not alone.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. I think what you said, you can't be an expert in AI as a whole. It could be before we made the comparison. It could be like 25 years ago saying I'm an expert on the internet, right? Like, what is that? There are so many different things. There is computer vision, there is voice with AI. There are many different things. There are the LLMs. When somebody speaks about AI today, is probably speaking about LLMs, but it's just the portion of what AI is, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I fully agree. And so the message, people, start now or you will stay behind your competitors.
Yeah, and just
Correct.
play. Be prepared to experiment and move quickly. I think, and in that context, I think failure. What's the necessary part of experimentation? Where you start by not knowing and you kind of figure it out by trying stuff. So you've got to be prepared to fail frequently and to treat that as an important, necessary, and valuable part of the process rather than anything negative.
Definitely. All right. So now, if you have to pick a superpower that you have as a founder, what is your superpower?
I think the most important superpower is to listen.
To listen.
Yeah. The best way to sell is to listen. People only buy things that they find valuable, and what they find valuable is a exploration that requires very careful listening.
I love it. That's profound. Yeah, but I agree. All right. So we have discussed about the technological revolution we are living now with AI, how it's being underestimated in the long term. It can reshape the world we know today. Also, we have discussed about the different challenges of starting a business, and we have told people if you haven't implemented AI, start now. You are not too late yet. So I love this conversation. I don't know if you want to send a last message to people before we wrap up.
Last message, I think in a context where you've got a sort of emergent thing and it's changing really fast, you've just got to be comfortable, no matter who you are, what your position, and what your age, to play. So I think that's the overriding message. I'd say, if you're a 50-something company leader, AI is not the thing that your grandson does. That's not okay. You have the responsibility and an opportunity to role model going and figuring it out. And I think if you take that first step and you're prepared to be uncomfortable and prepared to feel incompetent, because everyone does, that will lead you to wonderful places, and it will also be noticed. So play. One word.
Don't be afraid, take risks. Amazing. Thank you very much, Craig. I really enjoyed the conversation.
You're welcome, Alan. Nice to be on your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you very much.